Yes, the Mail sent reporter Matilda Rudd out to penetrate a closed Facebook group called Mums Who Clean. And she came back with a rare Mail exclusive, which is a story that's not been lifted from a rival website and has not appeared anywhere else before. Except that's not quite true, because this remarkable tale of the Bunnings grout cleaner has been told not once, but twice before by the Daily Mail itself, and indeed by Matilda Rudd, who told eager readers back in December
how you can transform your dirty tiles in minutes by using a tomato sauce bottle and miracle $10 spray from Bunnings.
And then again 3 weeks later.
Sparkling tiles in 3 steps. The simple trick that will give you shiny floors in minutes, and it only costs $10.
And while last week's version of the story is not word for word and has a new headline, the source in that bottle is clearly the same as in the first 2 versions, and some of the copy is identical.
This was done in minimal time and with minimal effort. She wrote alongside before and after photos of her floor. I had no idea they were that filthy. She continued, I love it.
And we love it too. A story so good they had to tell it thrice. And that's all from us tonight. There's more on our website. Don't forget Media Bites on your favourite social media platform every Thursday. But for now, until next week, goodbye.
Hi, Tony Jones live from Studio 22. On the panel tonight, Sam Dastyari, John Lee, Madeleine King, James Paterson and Eva Cox. Well, who will be the next casualty in the political donations arms race? That's coming up on Q&A in just a minute.
Gruen is coming back, so join us.
Leave your call to action till the end or people will switch off.
The show where experts tell us how advertising works and how it works on us.
It needs a jingle, Will.
Will you let me finish?
You took too long. Millennials will stop paying attention. Just say it's free.
Gruen starts September 25 on ABC and iView.
What's it take to make a great Aussie ad?
How do you feel?
Tuesday, October 1, join Gruen's Russell Howcroft.
My heroes made these ads. The national anthem.
And a host of familiar faces.
That's fantastic.
It got to you, that song.
For a true blue look at Mojo.
They sold it all.
The geniuses behind some of our best-loved ads.
I'm going straight to Mojo.
How Australia got its mojo. Tuesday, October 1 on ABC and iView.
Oh, look, I'm Grant Denyer.
Wednesday, Tom Gleeson bangs it hard through the middle.
I'm a goal umpire. When someone scores a goal, do you get this excited?
Try to stay dispassionate.
Well, I think you're doing a very good job of that tonight, Harley.
And in the season final, Sean McAuliffe takes pot shots at everything.
Drive-by shootings. Have we lost the fight against obesity when gunmen can't even be bothered getting out of their cars and walking?
Tom and Sean kick off one big night. Wednesday from 8 on ABC and iView. Artist, husband and carer.
She's gone. She's just not there.
She's deteriorating a lot.
The intimate portrait of Leon Pericles, his family and the journey to celebrate his legacy.
It is incredibly daunting to do without her.
Storm in a Teacup, tomorrow 9:30.
Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones. Now, here to answer your questions tonight, former Labor Senator Sam Dastyari, who was forced out of Parliament after a Chinese influence scandal. Foreign policy and China expert John Lee, Shadow Trade Minister Madeleine King, Victorian Senator James Paterson and social policy analyst Eva Cox. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Q&A is live in Eastern Australia on ABC TV iView and News Radio. Well, the controversy surrounding Liberal MP Gladys Liu raises questions about Chinese influence and dodgy donations. We'll get to that in just a moment. Our first question tonight takes us to the tensions in the Gulf after the weekend's drone strikes. It comes from Farden Nikju.
Today, Donald Trump has tweeted that America is locked and loaded in response to the weekend attacks on Saudi oil facilities. America seems to be blaming Iran, even though Yemeni rebels have claimed responsibility. Oil and petrol prices have already gone up, but how serious should we in Australia take Donald Trump's words? If serious enough, what should Australia do?
John Lee.
Well, first of all, I don't want to blame Donald Trump for what has occurred. Now, we don't know for sure that it was the Iranians, but all the evidence, the sophistication of the attacks suggests it was the Iranians. Now, why would the Iranians want to do that? The Americans and the Iranians are in a battle of wills at the moment. The Americans want to put together a new tough sanctions regime against the Iranians, which would include restrictions on the export of Iranian oil. Obviously, if you disrupt the supply of oil, there is a shortage in the short term of oil, and it's very hard to do that. Now, long term or medium term, is war a possibility? Well, of course it is. But what is at stake here? Iran, like the North Koreans, they want to be a nuclear-armed... they want to be a country with nuclear-armed missiles. That is a distinct possibility. Now, we can make the calculation, is war worth that? Many foreign policy analysts would suggest that it is.
John, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, agrees with you, says Iran's involved. Then Trump tweeted, we're looking to see, we think we know who the culprit is, but we're locked and loaded and ready to go. You say war is possible. Is it desirable?
War is never desirable, but when you're trying to dissuade a country, in this case Iran, from taking even more serious, grievous action, you've got to leave the prospect of war on the table. Imagine if the American president, Trump or anyone else said, we will never go to war. What would Iran do? What would North Korea do? It's a horrible, nasty world, but unfortunately, if you're trying to restrain authoritarian regimes of that ilk, you do have to leave war on the table.
Sam Dastyari, you were born in Iran.
Yes.
I'm just wondering whether your parents escaped from the Iranian Revolution, and I'm wondering if you think regime change is a good idea.
Yeah, look, I just want to start by saying I love the fact that, like, I've been away for a couple of years from this show, but now you come back and you start the show with the president tweeted and everyone's kind of OK with that, you know? Like, that's the basis of where our political discourse is at. I went to Iran about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I went with the ABC for Australian Story. And I'll tell you the one thing that just frightened me. I just want to put this in perspective. You go through the main street of Tehran, right? And they wouldn't let us film there. Like, they let me film back in the village that I was born in, but they wouldn't let us film in the main street of Tehran. And up on the giant banners and posters, right, there is the martyrs who have killed themselves in the Syrian conflict at the time, right? And that culture of martyrdom, that culture of death, the fetishization of kind of death and destruction and war. And I hear what John's saying. I agree with him to a certain extent. I just want to make sure people have an appreciation that this isn't Afghanistan, this isn't Iraq. This is not going to be an easy thing. Is it a desirable thing? Look, I believe in freedom and democracy in Iran. I always have. My parents fled the regime. How you achieve that and how the best way to achieve that, that's a different matter.
James Paterson, the implications for Australia was built into that question. What do you say?
Well, Tony, it's sadly a further escalation of the tensions in the region following the disruption of the supply of oil through the Straits of Hormuz, which Australia is obviously participating in an international coalition in an attempt to push back on that activity. About 6% of the world's oil comes from Saudi Arabia and that supply will be affected, but the International Energy Agency has said that global stocks of oil will not be threatened by this. Unfortunately, it probably will mean higher prices for consumers at the petrol bowser, but in terms of our security of supply of petrol and oil, it's not at serious risk.
How do you know that, actually? Because Donald Trump is talking about already dipping into the strategic petroleum supply, the emergency supply the United States has. We don't have one in Australia. We've got 28 days, effectively, of petrol supplies before it gets very, very dodgy, and one possibility is to ask the Americans to give us some of their strategic supply.
We have 28 days' worth of supply within our borders, but the Energy Minister has said on a modern definition of oil supply, which takes into account the oil that is already on its way to Australia, being shipped here, that we have much closer to the 90 days, which is recommended. So we're relatively confident about that, although we shouldn't be complacent about it. And certainly if there were a further escalation of tensions, if the worst came to worst that we were talking about earlier on the panel, that would potentially disrupt it in a more profound and disturbing way, and we might have to look at options like going to the United States and trying to access their strategic oil reserve. And
just briefly on the prospect of further conflict, already a commitment to ships in the Gulf, or at least one. Could this escalate as well? Could Australia be asked, as they were in previous Gulf conflicts, to contribute a lot more? Well, we certainly don't want it to escalate, Tony, and it's not in our interest that it escalates. The contribution... It's a bit out of your hands, though, isn't it? It may well be. Our contribution to that coalition in the Straits of Hormuz is a very precise, targeted, time-limited contribution and a relatively measured and moderate one. Of course, governments always consider, if events change, how we need to respond to that, but we're certainly not seeking any escalation. Eva Cox.
Well, if you look at this, I must say I'm slightly appalled to be sitting on a panel where people are cheerfully saying, or uncheerfully saying, we can just go to war again. I mean, because I'm the oldest person on this panel and happen to be able to remember at least the last Second World War as a small child, I don't think you talk about sort of going to war on things like this. I mean, this is a fight about petrol, about gas, about that things there. I think we actually should be looking at ways and means of avoiding war. We also, you know, as Sam said, you know, they've got a culture which doesn't see death as anything particularly scary because you go straight to heaven or whatever happens in those situations.
Get some virgins on the way.
Yeah. But I think we need, you know, we actually need to start thinking seriously about this business about saying, oh, yes, we'll just go to war. After all, if they get too impertinent and block us in being able to drive, you know, what else can we do? I just think that that's actually a failure to understand that we really do need to do that. And Trump is a menace because he's actually acting in ways which is making Iran and some of the other countries which are very sensitive about their identity even more anxious about what's happening and more likely to go to war. So I think we've got to keep ourselves clear.
He's interesting, though, isn't he? Because he threatens war in tweets, but he usually doesn't do it. I mean, in fact, he hasn't done it. And quite the contrary, he's actually sought peace on quite a few occasions.
I know, but you can't rely on that with the people that we're dealing with. I mean, that's part of the problem. And I think it's a very insecure thing. And I think we need to set up a very solid way of trying to avoid open conflict, because I don't think we can control it necessarily.
Madeline?
Yeah, well, I would start by agreeing with Eva, and that we should always seek to avoid war and any kind of conflict, and it has lots of scales. But I thank Farden for the question in the first place. And I also would agree with Sam. It is remarkable that we're here tonight and we start off with a tweet from a president of the US, and that's now how this setup is made now through a social media platform. But nonetheless, the priority now, after those drone strikes, is to seek to do all we can to de-escalate tensions in that area, because there will be no prosperity in that region without peace. And as a mature nation, we're obliged, and we should always seek to help resolve such disputes.
But Labor backs the commitment to the Gulf, does it?
We do. The commitment to the Strait of Hormuz is principally a very important freedom of navigation exercise. As an island trading nation, it's of critical importance to make sure that these trade passageways are free and open for all nations that seek to trade. I'm
just going to quickly go back to our questioner, Farden.
I address this question to all panels, including the Senator and Mr. Lee. I'm from Iran too. The Strait of Hormuz and commercial shipment should be secure, and also the downing of that U.S. drone weeks ago, Trump threatened and didn't do anything after that. But this time, attacking oil facility and getting more serious, we need to think, as Senator suggested, we need to think Australia as an alliance of United States, what we should do, or what should we do. OK, I'll throw that back to John, because I know you wanted to get in anyway, but we'll leave...
I want to get in because I can't speak for the panel, but I don't think I am happily talking about war. What I'm saying is that if you're trying to avoid a country that itself is threatening war, that is Iran, you have to, as the more powerful nation and as the leader of various coalitions and allies, put war on the table. If you don't, because if you don't, Iran will keep pushing further.
But if you put it on the table, they might pick it up.
Let's not forget, this is not an issue just between Iran and the United States. Iran is threatening Israel, it's threatening Saudi Arabia, it's threatening much of the region. This is... global politics is not just an issue between Donald Trump and the world. The United States makes mistakes, but the United States is there to act as a leader because no one else will do it. Now, think about this focus on Donald Trump. Why are we talking about Donald Trump? We're talking about Donald Trump, we're talking about the United States because the United States is the only country conceivably that is capable of resolving many of these regional and global issues. So, yes, it makes mistakes, but this is essentially what the Trump administration, it's not just the president, is trying to achieve. I don't work for the American administration, but if you analyse it from a foreign policy point of view, we don't have good options, but a bad option is to walk away.
OK, I'm
it's
going to move on.
Very scary.
A quick point there, Eva.
Very quick point. I think the idea of even assuming that America is actually acting rationally and reasonably at the moment, I think is a very big assumption.
OK, we'll leave that and move on to the next question. It's from Adrian Schofield.
Hello. Given that AFP raids on journalists closely followed their exposure of government infidelities under the hobgoblin of Homeland Security, when can we expect to see AFP raids on MPs involved in taking cash from Chinese developers, a clear and real threat to Homeland Security?
Sam Dastyari.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, first, let's just start with this. Sooner you do a federal Act, the better. I mean, the fact that there isn't one is ridiculous, you know? I mean, just look at what happened in New South Wales. The idea that some of these things happen in states and don't happen at a federal level, I think beyond that, I don't know how much time we've got to talk about this, the entire culture of donations and fundraising, I think, has become completely corrupted. And I say this not as some kind of university academic who's sat in some ivory tower and never fundraised or raised money or this, that. I'm saying this is probably one of, if not the biggest fundraisers the Labor Party ever saw. Federal ICAC, ban political donations, full stop, move to a completely public-funded system and start restoring as much credibility as you can back in the system. But you're right. I mean, I think the journalist thing is wrong, by the way. And I think you're kind of using it as a slightly, you know, Adrian, tongue-in-cheek point to make a bigger point. But the system's broken. I'm a symbol of the system being broken.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Gladys Liu's infractions rise to the same level as those that you committed that caused you to be effectively thrown out of the Parliament?
Look, I want to be careful here because I don't want to start playing an equivalency game, right? I don't think this is like... It's not some competition where there's a prize at the end of it to see things. I should have resigned from Parliament. I did resign from Parliament. That was the right thing for me to do. I take full responsibility, by the way, for the downfall of my own career. I don't palm that off to anyone else. I was young, arrogant, foolish, and thought I was smarter than everyone else.
Let me ask you,
that's on me.
Do you accept now that you were drawn in to spruik Chinese propaganda?
Yes. No. This is what I believe. I believe I was used by Chinese agents of influence, but, and I want to be clear about this, that's on me. I let myself get used. I'm not shirking that responsibility.
You knew that was happening at the time, is what you're saying?
Well, no. I'm saying that my out-of-control ego, arrogance, you can put a whole list of reasons on it, led me to these decisions, and I want to be very careful. So, was I used? Yes, but I'm not... I've got to this stage of my life, 2 years after a momentous scandal, like huge, right? Like journalists parked in front of your house for weeks, your marriage falls apart, your entire life collapsing in front of you, by being able to accept that I am responsible for my own downfall.
Let me ask you this, Gladys Liu, what sort of pressure would she be under from your experience?
I can only imagine what Gladys Liu is going through at the moment. I mean, just on that, like, let's not forget there are real people at the end of this, right? Real people. I mean, I can tell you what I think's happened with her, but the pressure she's under, the darkness, the phones, the people doing this, all of us talking behind her back or about her no one talking to her. I've actually, past couple of days, I've been trying repeatedly to call her. I think the best thing she can do for herself, for her causes she believes, for her party, is to actually leave Parliament. That's my personal view, and I say that as someone who has been through that kind of...
OK, we'll come back to you on some of this. Let's hear from other panellists. James, you first.
I think it's very important that we draw a very sharp distinction between what Gladys Liu has done or is alleged to have done and what Sam did. I think they're two very, very different things.
What's the difference when it comes to fundraising? Because that's the core thing that's unresolved here. As far as we know, there hasn't been an audit of the funds that Gladys Liu brought into the party. Should there be?
The very clear difference is that Gladys Liu was a fundraiser on behalf of the Liberal Party, and in doing so, all the money that she raised for the Liberal Party was declared in accordance with state and federal fundraising laws.
No, it wasn't.
What Sam did...
But that wasn't. That's just not true, James.
It is true. What Sam did
$40,000 that wasn't declared.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned $40,000, Sam, because what Sam did was accept money personally from Wang Zhengmo or companies that he controlled. These were not donations. $40,000 to meet legal fees that Sam had incurred, $1,600 to meet a travel bill overspend, and as a result of the relationship he developed with Wang Zhengmo, he was a lobbyist for Wang Zhengmo's citizenship, calling the Immigration Department twice to personally check on the progress of that application. He hired out the media centre at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Offices, stood in front of a crest of the Australian government alongside Wang Zhengmo and called for an end to the bipartisan Australian government position on the South China Sea and called for the government to adopt the Chinese government's position. And it is alleged when he went to visit Wang Zhengmo at his private residence, he advised him that he believed he was under the surveillance of national security agencies, that they should leave their phones inside, that they should go outside and have a conversation.
OK, all right, I'll pause you there. I'm going to go back to you to respond.
No, I get to respond to this, right?
That's what I'm trying to give you a chance to do.
All right. And I want to be clear, I'm not absolving myself of my responsibility. Some of what you said is sensationalised, some of it is quite exaggeration of things that happened, but, right, you look at Gladys Liu's situation. There is her arguing for changing policy for rich Chinese developers to the Liberal Party. There is quite credible stories that security agency officials made warnings about her being a Liberal Party candidate. There is undeclared donations from her that are being cleared up as we speak. There is being a member, an actual member of the propaganda arm of the Communist Party for perhaps a decade, 10, 12 years. I'm not here, and I didn't come here tonight to play this game of, oh, let's kick Sam, this, that, equivalence, this, that. No, no. I have done what I think a lot more politicians should do. Accept responsibility for their failures, and sometimes in life, and you know, I didn't want to be doing this. I didn't want this to be my life. I didn't want it to be that, you know, but sometimes in life, the only course of action you have, the best course of action you have, is to take responsibility. And in the case of politics, for me, it meant leaving. Okay. And that crushed me.
So, before I come to you, John, I want to hear from some of the women on the panel. So, Natalie.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to remark and thank Sam for his honesty and his self-awareness. I mean, that's quite a journey he's been through and accepts responsibility for it. And I think he should be congratulated for that. He was a good colleague when we worked together.
Do you accept the point that James just made, that Gladys Liu's infractions do not add up to the same sort of thing that caused Sam to leave Parliament?
Yeah, as a factual matter of record, there are different circumstances. Of
course there are.
And I think, yeah, Sam's not disagreeing with that. There was, and Adrian's question was about us being accountable for donations, and there is a disclosure requirement. We do have different rules. I know I have to, if I have a donation, anything over $1,000, we have to declare who it is. So you can always know who we are receiving donations from. And I think what happened with Miss Liu is, you know, and a few times, at least once anyway, she was incorrect. She didn't declare one, and that's led to a few other questions, and perhaps she does have, you know, questions to answer, and it's a pretty simple thing to clear up if she wants to. It's a matter of coming into Parliament.
So what is it you're actually calling for? Is it an audit of all the money she raised, or what?
Well, I imagine...
Or is it just a lot of political outrage?
I'm not. Well, people are outraged, and that's not me making that up. Like, there is many of the press gallery and many other parliamentarians are questioning why She has not been able to declare such things when there are rules in place, and we all have to abide by them.
But currently you're not arguing that she should be forced out of Parliament?
I would not argue that, but I would argue that she should come and explain herself. She should present to the Parliament and explain exactly what happened.
Eva?
I'd like to put this in a broader context, which is one of the things that's been bugging me for quite some time, which is we know from the polls that there's a huge level of distrust of voters of political parties, candidates and everything else. We went through all of the dramas with Section 44 and various people dropping out. We went through the thing with Sam and sort of all the scandals about this. Now we're going through it with Gladys, and we've also got it going through in New South Wales. If we are serious about winning back some trust from voters, and it is actually important because democracy won't survive unless the voters trust the people they vote, have the capacity to trust the people they vote for. And at the moment, if you look at the polls, they go down every time. We need to sort of clear things up. It's all very well targeting one person for doing this and one person for doing that and doing the other. And yes, we should be able to do that. But I think we've just got to do some serious thinking about the fact that actually targeting and finding another scandal is actually going to just contribute to the general thing.
But this is a very targeted scandal in the sense that what we're talking about here is Chinese influence in Australian politics.
I know, but what
should that be cleared up separately to the broader outrage of politicians' misdeeds?
I think it's part of the same overarching type thing. You know, it might be this in this case. I'm quite sure we could find some other countries in other cases. It's the fact that we spend a lot of time hunting people down for misdemeanours. And they are misdemeanours. We need to know why there are so many of those things happening. But I just think, I mean, my view would be that I think Gladys has probably made enough errors to make herself sins, you know, with suspicion. And she's got to work out how she deals with that particular issue, despite the fact she's being defended by the Prime Minister. It doesn't seem to be working in that sense. Okay. But I do think we need a broader discussion about how do we sort of try and get to the point where we actually are reasonably comfortable about the fact that we've got politicians that people can at least trust.
Yeah. John Lee.
Look, I don't know Sam, I don't know Gladys, so I don't presume to know what the intentions at the time were or what Gladys's intentions have been. What you can focus on and what you can assess is what they've done. And the issue is not just donations, it's what you give in return to your donor. Now, I have to say, Sam, I think you are trying to absolve yourself. You have suffered a heavy personal price, but I think you're trying to absolve yourself by equating yourself with Gladys Liu. Look at the differences. Largesse was received personally and to the party. What was given in return? As mentioned, a press room at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Offices was hired. You stood in front of the podium with the engraved Australian coat of arms. You repeated pretty much the exact words used by Xi Jinping, Wang Yi on the South China Sea. A person of interest to the Australian Security Intelligence Services, which you knew about, you advised them how to avoid detection.
Okay, no, that I dispute.
Okay, all right. John, just let him respond to that because the same accusation has been made by James Paterson.
Yeah, look, firstly, look, I'm getting a lecture here from someone who works for the US Study Centre, which actually registered as a foreign agent in this country, is a whole separate issue. Let's just park
honestly
that.
and transparently, unlike some others.
No, Jay, sorry, we're getting lectured here by the IPA, who actually hide every single donation they receive and make. Right? I mean, seriously, right? Let's put some perspective in this. I am not, and I'm going to be quite clear about this. Yeah, I should have resigned from Parliament. I did resign from Parliament. And I think the lesson here, and the important lesson here, is how does foreign influence and the insidious nature of foreign influence work? What are the lessons from that? And what comes from that moving forward? And what I said about Gladys, and my position and opinion on the Gladys situation, was I think she will be going through hell right now. And I said, as someone who has been through that on a personal level, was giving personal view on what someone going through that emotionally should do. But let's just not pussyfoot around this. Does anyone here actually believe, right, anyone else actually believe that the Prime Minister would be defending Gladys Liu if she wasn't a member of her political party? I mean, this is politics, right? You get treated one way by one political party, another by another, and the bigger issue here, and the more important issue, and I think the lesson here, right, is how does this insidious nature of foreign influence in our politics work? And I think I'm a cautionary tale.
OK, as a cautionary tale, I'm going to put to you once again the allegation made by both the gentlemen on either side of me, and that is that you went to a... You went to a foreign agent and you warned him that his phone was being tapped.
What I did was...
And by the way... had security information that was the case.
What I did was, in my final ever meeting with Huang Zhangmo, somewhere around 2016, I went to his house and said to him, I can't talk to you anymore, I can't be friends, all the journalists are telling me that you're some kind of spy, and by the way, that was incredibly stupid, arrogant and wrong. I take full responsibility for that, and I resigned from Parliament.
Tony, we're not
Did you tell him that his phone was being tapped?
No, I told him that he was a spy.
Tony,
some words to that effect.
We're not going to resolve this today, but I say elephants are grey, Sam says they're pink. I'll allow the audience to decide.
OK, I'm going to...
That doesn't make sense. That's not even witty.
I'm going to leave the colour of elephants.
I mean, what is this? No, seriously,
All
it's
right.
like primary school.
We've got another question on this subject. It's from Claudia McDonald.
Hi, Sam. This is for you mostly as well. It's along the same vein as Adrian's question.
Yep.
You said you let yourself fall victim. You gave yourself over to the Chinese donors, essentially. Let yourself get used by them.
Yep.
This is something that we've seen repeated through so many politicians, their careers ending in horrible scandals. It's something that's so characteristic of politics these days, and I feel the well is running dry for politicians and political heroes that we as young people can look up to and aspire to be like. So, do you really think there is any way to create real cultural change beyond reactive federal ICACs, which we do need? Is there any way to create real cultural change that can remove this chronic self-interest within our political sphere?
Yeah, I think to start with, probably moving away from young career politicians like James and myself is probably a start.
Hey.
But no. Can I tell you the importance of the donor thing that I'm really kind of concerned about, this whole donation thing, right? People who aren't really involved in politics may not quite understand. The pressure to raise money is so incredible. It actually changes votes. Right? Raising money in campaigns, the pressure is so incredible. So when Gladys Liu or someone is bragging about raising $1 million for the Liberal Party, you know, in her promotional material and that, these things matter. And you know what they say in the US, a new congressman? A new congressman is told you should spend 70 to 80% of your time raising money. I think a good start would be a completely public-funded system, and it is going to mean that's going to be more expensive for taxpayers, and there are some constitutional issues that you can get around. You can change the Constitution if you have to. But, yeah, I think there needs to be a cultural kind of change and shift. But, look, we reward tricky politics. We reward apparatchiks. We reward people like myself and James and others who spent a lifetime going through career politics. And I think some of that has led to bad outcomes.
So, Sam, does it change your moral core? Did you lose sight of what was right and wrong, literally?
I think you live in... Yes. You live in... Unfortunately, right? And I think a lot of politics will pretend, no, I'm perfect, I'm great, I'm fantastic, I haven't changed all this, that. Yeah, you live in a bubble, right? You live in this bubble of cars and drivers and people taking... I ride a bicycle now. But you live in this kind of bubble of who you talk to and who talks to you, and you're the most important person in most of the rooms you're in. A lot of people, and hopefully most people, can deal with that better than I can. I couldn't deal with that, right? My ego was out of control, and I paid an incredibly high price for it.
OK, I want to hear from James first. The idea of having publicly funded elections, getting rid of the whole donations thing, you wouldn't have a problem with Gladys Liu if that happened. Is it a good idea to at least consider this kind of fundamental change, get rid of this pernicious fundraising?
I want to address that, Tony, but I also want to come back to something that the questioner opened up with, which I think is a really important point to make. Yes, lots of politicians make mistakes. Yes, lots of political careers end in tears. But let's not lump in what Sam did with conventional political errors and misjudgment. It was a very, very different thing. No, this is a serious point. This is a serious point.
Angus Taylor?
This is a serious point. Sam became associated with someone whose citizenship was rejected on character grounds and whose permanent residency was cancelled on the advice of security agencies, and who we have very good reason to believe was an agent of influence of the Chinese Communist Party in Australia. That is not just a routine political mistake or a routine bad judgment. That is profoundly serious.
You made that point earlier pretty much. So did John. So let's move on to this question of are donations political donations and the fundraising element of it, is that a pernicious and poisonous element of our politics?
Not inherently, Tony. Just because some politicians are incapable of acting ethically around donations doesn't mean the whole political system is broken. And there are some really downside risks.
So you have no problems at all with Gladys Liu and what she did, because the Prime Minister, for example, at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, on the advice of his own security agencies, did not go along to one of her fundraisers because of the people who were donating the money. So you have no problem with that?
I think Gladys herself would acknowledge that prior to being elected to Parliament, she should have been more judicious in some of her associations, particularly with Chinese community organisations.
Didn't this ring any bells? If you've got a Prime Minister who is being told by his security agency, don't go there, don't get photographed with those people, and yet they are key people making donations.
Well, I'm not privy to that advice, obviously, Tony, but I don't actually believe the incident you're talking about was even a fundraiser. I'm pretty sure it was just a community meet and greet on behalf of the member for Chisholm at the time, Julia Banks. I don't think it was fundraising related. So I'm not sure you've diagnosed...
The Prime Minister was advised not to go.
That's what media reports say. I'm not privy to
be seen with the people who were at the core of this.
I don't know if that's true, Tony. That's what the media are reporting. I don't have any way of independently verifying.
Eva Cox. Quickly.
And this goes back actually to the point I was trying to make before, that we need to put trust back. If you look at who's in Parliament at the moment, and I agree with the thing about that, you know, most of the people in Parliament actually come up through the political system. They work for political as staffers, they work in the unions, or they work in various other things. They hit Parliament without ever having a real job. Their views of the wider society are actually extraordinarily limited. We used to have parliamentarians, and maybe we should sort of...
Are you saying that working in a think tank is not a real job?
Yes, having done so. I mean, the point is you're...
That's part of my point, really.
Yeah, I mean, but it's that whole thing about being completely in a world where politics becomes the issue, where you completely lose your sense of what's going on the outside, you completely lose connections about that. I've been a member of the Labor Party at one stage. You get caught up with the internal politics of the things there. Loyalty becomes the major thing, and it's not loyalty to your country, it's loyalty to your party, your faction, or whatever else it happens to be. You get sort of fed into something like the various right-wing think tanks that we have no idea where their money comes from in most cases, and you get a sense, you know, that we lose the sense that people go to Parliament to serve the community. Maybe we should limit the things there. Maybe everybody should have you should be an older age group. Maybe you should actually have a limited term in Parliament. I don't know why, you know, after a while things there. And maybe we need to get back to the idea that being Parliament is serving the country.
Madeline, I'd like to bring you in. Can I get you to focus not only on the disillusion that's expressed in that question, but on Sam's point that the whole political donations system is corrupting effectively.
And thanks, Claudia, for the question. I will go to that, Tony, but I just want to acknowledge for Eva and everyone else's sake that not all politicians, I don't even think most, actually come up through the party systems. Surely a number do, undoubtedly, but no, they're also ex-policemen, ex-soldiers, former teachers, obviously several lawyers, a vice-chancellor in the Liberal Party, broadcasters, nurses, you know, and they're in the Labor members, other than the vice-chancellor. But
once you get in, you've got to hang on until you get your super, right?
What do you mean? You get super anyway? Like,
you get a much better one if you're a politician.
Well, that's not necessarily... No, I came from a university background and I had a much better super working for a university than I do in this current job. So, and the super that politicians get is 15.4%. So there are many occupations that pay a lot more, there are many that pay a lot less. So the whole pension system has gone.
I was being facetious. Let's go to the donations question.
Yes, certainly. There is a lot of pressure on people to seek donations and to fundraise. Sam mentioned that before, and it's an extraordinary exercise that happens all the time to fund our campaigns. And I think if anyone that could raise $1 million, like Sam probably did and Ms Liu has, they are rock stars in their parties because, you know, that's a really handy bit of money if you've got to pay for advertising. And if you're lucky, you have a Prime Minister that can donate $1.75 million of his own money to his party. And if you're unlucky like us, you have to put up with a millionaire tycoon that puts out certainly anti-Western Australian sentiment, anti-Chinese sentiment in the form of Clive Palmer's ads all throughout the country. That's $50 million worth.
Correct me
So
if I'm wrong.
you have to keep fundraising so you can keep trying to combat that and put your message out there. And it's an enormous amount of pressure on all parliamentarians. I think there is something to be said for public funding. It would be expensive, though, and that's something that very most certainly has to be considered.
Unions do donate a lot of money, right?
Yeah, they do.
So does business.
But they don't donate.
Big business donates a very large amount.
OK, I'm going to pause this conversation because we've got another question. It's from Bill Bowman. It's on the same subject. Bill.
Indeed, thank you. In reality, countries are not all good or all bad. In reality, countries are part good and part bad, and that applies to Australia as it applies to China. The reality of the situation is that China, over the past several decades, has been able to lift hundreds of millions of their people up out of poverty. That's what they have achieved. That significant economic growth has also been of great advantage to Australians through boosting the Australian economy. Given that sort of reality and benefit to Australia, how do we bring the discussion in Australia concerning China back to a basis which is less hysterical and more rational?
John Lee.
I don't think it's hysterical. I think it's Australia, and it's both sides of politics, I think would agree with this. It's Australia responding to certain things that have occurred. Now, at the moment, the most fractious thing in the Australian-China relationship, or one of them, is about political interference and covert influence. Now, look at what the Chinese have set up and done. They have something called the United Front. The United Front is a vast bureaucratic apparatus of more than 9 bureaus. It hires at least 40,000 people. To give you some context, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade only hires 6,000 people. It's got billions of dollars in funding. Now, importantly, one of its specific objectives, and it's in policy, is to influence the diaspora of other countries in ways that favour China and on issues where China will disagree with diasporas, host countries of those diasporas. Australia, United States, New Zealand, Canada, etc. Now, if you think this sounds like Cold War stuff, it is, because the Chinese don't think the Cold War's over. Read their documents, and it sounds extreme, but it's true. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, a widely reported incident, April 2017. Meng, their security czar, the czar of the entire security apparatus in China, which is immense, comes to Australia. At the time, the Chinese wanted the Labor Party to support the extradition treaty with China. Meng tells the Labor leadership, and it's widely reported, if you do not support the extradition treaty, I will instruct the Australian Chinese population that they are against China. Now, can you imagine the significance of that? That is saying that a foreign power will activate, assuming they could, will activate the diaspora of this country against the policies of politicians in this country.
So, John, given the gravity of what you've just described, is it fair enough that the Prime Minister, when having to confront questions about precisely this issue within his own party, accuses those of doing it of racism?
Well, it depends on who Prime Minister Morrison is calling racist.
Well, he's basically saying the Labor Party, because they pursued these matters against a Chinese MP.
And Andrew Bolt.
Look, I generally don't like the use of the word racism unless it is racist, and I'm not really sure what Morrison is referring to. What I would say, though, is
well, he was basically saying, I don't know if he used the word racism, but essentially what he said is,
yes, he did.
You are... Well, we'll come back to you on that. Yeah. But he was saying you are dissing, if you like, the entire 1.2 million Chinese in Australia by attacking this politician.
Well, look, what I would suggest is if you look at what the problem is that when you have a foreign infiltration of an ethnic group, and look, clearly the vast majority of Australian Chinese people are not supporters of the Chinese Communist Party. But when you have a foreign infiltration of a diaspora in a country, mere association with cultural groups, etc., will lead to dispersions being cast. Now, those dispersions can be quite ugly. Sometimes they are racist. But my point is that if you want to fix the problem, you've got to call out and get rid of this foreign interference.
Okay.
Otherwise, society does fracture.
Right.
On a racist comment, look, I really can't comment because I don't know who it was he was referring to.
Madeline.
Well, yeah, the Prime Minister did accuse us of being racist for, you know, raising concerns about Ms Liu, and he's the one himself that has brought up the matter of someone's heritage, and that should not have come up. These are just... they're questions to be answered by this parliamentarian, and she should answer them, and it doesn't really matter what her race is. The fact is that these are donations from a certain influential nation, and we have to, you know, they have to be held... she has to be held to account for that, and I think that's reasonable. It's pretty rich coming from a Prime Minister that, as a shadow minister, refused to use the word multiculturalism. I think that is Scott Morrison's history. He's not that much of a fan of multiculturalism. He is now, of course, but in the past he has chosen not to be so. But I think there are important discussions to be had around the Chinese diaspora in Australia that form a very important part of our community, and there are Chinese people that are not necessarily members of the Chinese Communist Party, and it's the Chinese Communist Party and their influence as an authoritarian regime, their influence into this country, that we need to be very clear-eyed about. And I think for those of Chinese heritage, you know, you should know that we know not every Chinese person living in this country is a member of the Communist Party or would seek to be influenced by them.
James, what was the Prime Minister accusing Labor of, if not racism?
Tony, the Prime Minister didn't use the word racist. What he said that the Labor Party was doing was engaging in grubby tactics when it comes to Gladys Liu, and I think he's right to do so. And I'll give you a concrete example of how they did this.
He made a broader point, though, didn't he? He made a broader point. He extended it out to the entire Chinese community.
He did, and I'll come to that, but I just want to substantiate this point about grubby tactics. In question time last week in the House of Representatives, the Labor Party asked question after question after question, which was ruled out of order by the Speaker. Now, the questioner in this case was Mark Dreyfus. He knows how to ask a question that is in order if he wants to. He also knows how to ask a question that's out of order. And in asking questions that cast aspersions about Gladys Liu that were out of order, he knew that the Speaker, Tony Smith, would rightly prevent the Prime Minister from answering those questions. So the smear was raised, but there was no possibility to respond to that smear, and that's why the PM has said that there are grubby tactics being engaged in here. To the wider point, Australia was dangerously complacent, particularly big sections of our media and political class a few years ago, about the risks of foreign interference. And I actually think, by and large, it's a good thing that we are now living in a much more hypersensitive environment to those things. We should be alert to those risks for all the reasons that John outlines. However, in doing so, we have to be really, really careful that we don't inadvertently or otherwise cast aspersions about good Australians who love this country, who love freedom and democracy as much as any other person in this country, who happen to be Chinese. And there's 1.2 million of them, and they deserve respect like any other Australian.
Sam, I'll give you the final word. Keep it brief.
I'm impressed that, I don't know if James memorises the talking points in the morning or just eats the document. Unbelievable. Like, you did it from rote. That's amazing. No, but look, you're right. You're completely right. You've got to be... there is good and there is bad. It's not all black and white. 1.2 million Chinese Australians who identify with Chinese heritage. Amazing people. Our largest trading partner, a huge success story. And there is a legitimate, real problem, and I think John was actually quite eloquent about it, around foreign interference. And let's please not correlate the two.
OK, we'll move on. You're watching Q&A. It's been a fascinating discussion on the Chinese issue, but it's time to move on to other topics. The next question comes from Jessica Gray. Jessica.
Hi. This week, both of our major parties opposed the motion to declare a climate emergency amidst the New South Wales and Queensland bushfires. As a young Australian, I'm truly terrified of what lies ahead. Seemingly, the government is not listening to the majority of Australians who want more action taken on climate change. So what can this majority possibly do to make our governments listen?
Eva Cox, start with you.
It's a really hard one because they're just trying to ignore the whole fact that it's there. You know, we've been sliding around it in the various things. It's been part of knocking off particular governments. We've had all of these different things about the environment. but nobody's really prepared to address it. And because you've got a very solid group of people who, for all sorts of reasons, don't want to acknowledge that, you know, we have an environmental problem, they always pop up in appropriate moments with another study that they found that said, you know, this is happening 40,000 years ago, whatever it is. And it's very difficult, but I think part of the problem, and I'll go back briefly to what I was talking about before, is that we actually need to get people behind us. And I think what's happening with, A, the environmental movement and some of this stuff is that if people get too scared, they switch off. And if people don't trust other people, they're not prepared to sort of give up things in order to improve the environment. So I think we've got to get to the point where people don't feel as disillusioned with the system as they do now, because until we do that, we're not going to get the serious movements of being able to say, yes, we do need to do something about the climate, but to do that we actually have to trust other people want to do it as well, and we have to trust our government. So it's part of that whole process, because I think far too many people at the moment are just switching off. It's too hard. They do the doona thing, crawl back into bed, pull the doona over their head and hope it'll be gone away when they get back up afterwards.
I'm going to go to Madeline. I'd like to put the question to you like this. If Labor does what it's now debating, and that's to lower its carbon emissions targets, what do you think will happen to your core support, particularly young voters like our questioner?
Yeah, I don't think young voters are necessarily our core support. I wish more of them were, that's for sure.
So you don't need to worry about them then?
No, I do need to worry. Of course, we need to worry about everyone. Like, that's being facetious again, Tony.
Making a point. Really.
Yeah, no, I get it. The action on climate change is critically important. I mean, I can't believe there aren't more people marching on the streets, quite frankly, to try and prompt the government to do more on this. And I have a lot of respect, actually, for the people that do go and participate in some of these protests. And when school children go and do that, I don't have any objection to that. They're young people. They will inherit this earth and this country, and they've got every right to go and protest, you know, peacefully about things of great concern to them.
So what will happen, those people, will they disrespect the Labor Party if you lower your carbon emissions targets, therefore breaking a promise that you gave before, and actually a long-term promise?
Our policies are under review, and we are going to look at them, and we have to, because the suite of policies we had, including that one, didn't work out for us in the election. And this is just... I think, and you know, my caucus colleagues think, it's a rational response to an election loss. We have to review everything.
So, an election loss, a perception that climate change didn't work for you.
Not at all.
Means
not
you
at
chuck
all.
the principles out the window?
No. I think we've got to put them into a narrative in a much better fashion that we did, and how climate change and action on that and our emissions reduction targets works into that has to figure into it. And we're not going to jump into this too quickly because of pressure from outside. We as a Labor caucus and a movement have to think about this deeply, respecting the wishes of people like Jessica, and know the future they want to inherit should be better than what it is now. And I appreciate...
Let's hear from someone who's sort of left the scene now. I mean, you can look at it with some dispassion.
No, look, you're right. I mean, without being part of a kind of broken record here, place you'd start with is where the donations are coming from. Right? Like, a mining magnate, right, Clive Palmer, spent $56 million to shit on Bill Shorten. Can I say that on the ABC?
You just did, Sam.
And in part cost an election, right? You know, and you look at where the money comes from and the lobbying and the influence and this and that. I think we would have very different climate policies in this country if you actually started from the premise of removing a lot of that money from politics.
So just quickly on the question that I asked Madeline, how do you feel about the prospect of Labor changing its carbon emissions targets because it didn't work for them in the last election?
I think the review process is right. I think the outcome that they should move to at the end of the review, my personal view, it's always right to review things. You lost an election, we shouldn't have lost, we lost. Ask yourself why. My personal view is that we didn't lose the election, or Labor didn't lose the election because people didn't think that they weren't, you know, that they believed too much in their policies. I actually think it was the right policy, and I think they should stick with it.
OK, James, it's obviously aimed at both sides of politics, and clearly there's a sense you're getting from our young question, and we'll go to... By the way, let me just put it to you. I mean, do you see both sides of politics as lacking in this area?
Oh, 100% I do. I'm not going to hide it. Love Labor, always have, and I'm more leaning towards Greens. I do think what you're saying, Sam, about the election, like, I don't think it's Labor's policy that lost the election. I think Liberal actually had a short and sharp campaign, and it got through to so many people. But I'm telling you, I was devastated on election day, and all of my friends as well, who are all, you know, want something good to come of the climate one day.
So what do you? So these guys won government. What do you want to hear from them? From
Liberal?
Yep.
Anything. Nothing, to be honest.
James, I'm not going to ask you nothing. So, but let's start with this thing of the bushfires, because it was at the core of the question, and people are terrified this summer is going to be one of the worst we've ever seen, and the bushfires are being driven, in the belief of many, by climate change. What do you say?
Well, I fear I'm not going to please you, I'm afraid, with that lead-up. But I understand why the environmental movement attaches a lot of importance to motions like this in the Parliament. But the truth is that they are symbolic motions. And had that motion passed the House of Representatives this week, what would have been different about the climate? Nothing at all. What would have been different about the bushfires in Queensland and New South Wales? Nothing at all. I think you asked it in your question, what should you do to get through to policymakers to have change? I think you should focus on the substantive issues, on the policy questions, on the big challenges that we face, because...
Can I just say this? If half the country is on fire during summer, that's going to be a substantive issue. Yeah. Do you accept that...
Just a fraction of hyperbole there, Tony, but...
Well,
this question is not in the talking points.
But a lot of the country is on fire, and places that haven't been on fire for a long time. Do you accept that climate change has a role in that?
Of course, Tony, and you've asked me that question on this panel many times before, and I accept the science of climate change, just to do the tick disclaimer for you. But if Australia shut down all of our industry tomorrow, it wouldn't make any difference at all to the global temperatures. The reality is that this is a global challenge, and if the course that we are on, particularly from large emitters, countries like China, which is the world's largest emitter almost by a factor of 2 to the next largest emitter, and under the Paris Agreement promised to increase their emissions by 2030, well then anything Australia does is not going to make a big difference. The reason why I'm optimistic and why I hope you're not too discouraged by tonight is that no matter what happens on an intergovernmental level, or no matter what happens with Paris or Kyoto or any of these agreements, there's actually technological changes that are happening right now that are really positive. Like the advances in efficiency in photovoltaic solar cells have been way more than anybody forecast that they would be. And ultimately, I put my trust and faith in human ingenuity and technological evolution to solve these things more than any government policy can.
John, quickly on that.
Look, I mean, any issue of climate change, the shame for me is that it should be about reducing carbon emissions, right? That is what you're trying to get to. But it's become, do you like renewables? Do you want to focus on more efficient use of fossil fuels, etc., etc.? I think you do whatever the science tells you and the economics tells you works best on lowering carbon emissions. Unfortunately, it's become a political debate of, do you support fossil fuels or do you support...
Well, you just heard another argument there, which is it doesn't matter what Australia does because China's going to ruin it anyway.
Well, I think that from a scientific, technical point of view, or if you measure global carbon emissions, that's correct. I think there's an issue of how you want to position your economy. But once again, I think it's got to be a decision made about science and technology and economics as to the best energy mix to position yourself in the future economy. And when I hear comments about let's get rid of all fossil fuels, not only is that unrealistic, but it pretty much cuts out any realistic policy response that will help you position and transition into the future.
OK, it's time for one last question. It's from Catherine Minns. Catherine.
Right. Pushing an agenda to drug test and income manage welfare recipients further enforces stereotypes and creates further hardships for those already suffering. In New Zealand, where drug testing of welfare recipients occurs, only 0.3% of those people tested positive, Why does the government have such a strong agenda to push drug testing welfare recipients?
I'll start with Eva Cox on this, your special area.
I think the government is very busy trying to prove that the only reason that people are unemployed is because they're not working hard enough. They're not, you know, they're not having a go. Completely ignores all the structural problems that we have about unemployment, completely ignores the fact that we've got far more you know, people who are on unemployment benefits than we have actually people for jobs, ignores the fact also, I keep insisting on this, that half the people on New Start, nearly half the people on New Start are not actually job seekers officially because they happen to be cancer patients and other people like that. But still, the government is obsessed with the idea that if they can prove that, you know, that the people are lazy, that they don't want to have jobs and that they're drug bearers, that they're bad parents, they're doing all of those things, they want to stigmatise the poor and the disadvantaged. We know it doesn't work. The cashless debit card is useless. It doesn't work. Drug testing doesn't work because if you find somebody's got, you know, onto drugs, they've done it in New Zealand, they've done it in other places, it doesn't work. They just want to spend a lot of money trying to prove that the reason people are unemployed is that they're sort of hopeless. And it's all their fault, and it's got nothing to do with the rest of the country.
Eva, a questioner has a hand up. Catherine.
So, one thing I find really disheartening about the conversation is they always talk about people on welfare as being, you know, these people that just don't want jobs and all that. My father was a carer for my mum for 13 years after she had a stroke, and she recently passed away from cancer, and he's 61, hasn't worked in 13 years, and he's forced onto New Start, which is barely enough money to support him. And he has to go through all these job-searching things, applying for all of these jobs that no one's going to give an interview for. And he just has to feel like you know, that he's doing everything wrong, and all he's done for the past 13 years was support my mum.
How do you feel about the prospect of him being drug tested?
It really upsets me because he hasn't done anything wrong, and also I also receive welfare as well. I work 2 casual jobs which definitely don't give me enough money. I study full-time at university, and the fact that I feel like I could be drug tested, it's degrading. You don't want to... It makes us feel like we're doing something wrong when all we're trying to do is just make a living and try and get through life. And I'm trying to get a degree to get myself a good job in the future, and I can't work a full-time job at the moment while doing that.
OK, now can I... Sorry, Eva, I'm going to throw that to James because...
Can I just have one sentence onto the thing?
Yep.
Drug testing is just another form of stigma. Being on the cashless welfare card is stigma. Everything is stigmatising, and what's stigmatising is remove your sense of agency so you don't go and look for a job because you feel so lousy about it.
OK, James. OK. Now, first of all, can you just talk to Catherine and try and justify your policy or potential policy to someone in her situation and her father's situation?
Absolutely, and in doing so, I want to just respond to the final comment that Eva made there. Why on earth would the government want to discourage people from seeking work? That would be totally counterproductive. In what universe would be that be our objective? I have no interest at all in demonising or stigmatising people who are on welfare. None at all. They are our fellow Australians. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect like everyone else. But what we do know is if you are on welfare and you are also abusing drugs, you're going to find it really difficult to get a job. Now, I completely accept Eva's point about the fact that creating jobs for these people is a burden that falls on the government. It's one of our #1 priorities. We focus on it all the time. I think the 1.4 million jobs we've created since we won office in 2013 is a good start, but we have to keep doing it every day because if there aren't jobs for people to go to, then they're not going to get them, obviously.
So do you think it's fair enough for her father to be drug tested?
I don't accept that it's inherently degrading to be drug tested. People in the mining industry are drug tested all the time.
They have a job.
Exactly, they do have a job.
They have a job which involves them having to not be on drugs.
Indeed. In fact, I think all jobs you should not be on drugs in order to be employed, Eva. Not just in the mining industry. I think it's an impediment to working in any job.
What about a universal drug testing program for everybody who works?
I mean, I think that would probably be quite expensive and excessive because I think that's not the target area.
Would it be a good idea, though, just based on the logic that you put forward?
No, I think we should target people where we know where there's a problem. We know that drugs are preventing them from getting a job.
I just want to say one thing to you. I assure you, there are a lot more politicians doing drugs than there people are in New Start.
Madeline.
Thanks, Sam.
I will take your drug test right now. You've got one, I'll take it right now.
I just want to know what you think about the question.
Well, I think the policy is horrid. It's designed to humiliate. It's Orwellian in nature. I hope it can be gone. People are... unemployed and find themselves in this situation for so many reasons, and it is quite frankly humiliating to be drug tested, especially people that go into mining, that's a condition of their employment and they're very well paid. It is a different circuit. They know that when they go in. When you become unemployed and unemployed for a long time, you didn't want to do that. Like, you're not going out to be unemployed, you want to get a job. And what it'll do is just drive, people won't go and get New Start because it will be humiliating. I mean, yeah, it's an awful policy, and the sooner it's gone, the better.
John Lee.
Look, when any government sets a policy for a lot of people and any bureaucracy in Canberra and elsewhere implements that policy, there's going to be situations where it's unjust, it's inappropriate for the individual. So I don't really have an answer for you. But the issue then becomes, do you do away with the policy?
Yes.
Look, I don't know whether the policy has been effective or not. I think we've got to go by the data as to whether it has achieved what it's trying to achieve.
I've got the data.
If it has, then we try to make it more targeted. If it hasn't, then we do away with it.
OK, that's all we have time for tonight. I'm sorry to say we're just running over time. Please thank our panel. Sam Dastyari, John Lee, Madeline King, James Paterson and Eva Cox. Thank you very much. Thank you. You can continue the discussion on Facebook and Twitter, and next week we're on Q&A. The Minister for Communications and Arts and Cyber Safety, Paul Fletcher. Legendary broadcaster Kerry O'Brien. TV presenter Jan Fran. Journalist turned counsellor Di Lee. And Shadow Health Minister Chris Bowen. Until next Monday, good night.
It's the forum where you set the agenda. Head to the Q&A website to register for our audience, upload a video question for our panel, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Plus, use the hashtag Quanda and join the live discussion during the show. Q&A, for the people, by the people, where every question counts.
Every day of my life, I feel like I'm constantly under threat. I am sick and tired of pretending that everything is okay.
This is your opportunity to get a lot more than a medical centre.
Look, the Prime Minister had to cut a deal. You and your community were just collateral. They saw your interview. They think you might be a threat.
Gruen is coming back, so join us.
Leave your call to action till the end or people will switch off.
The show where experts tell us how advertising works and how it works on us.
It needs a jingle, Will.
Will you let me finish?
You took too long. Millennials will stop paying attention. Just say it's free.
Gruen starts September 25 on ABC and iView.
ABC News at 7 is a window to your neighbourhood, the ACT and your world.
Local news is crucial in keeping you up to date with our Canberra community.
We don't just tell the stories that matter, we tell you why they matter to you.
The ABC shines a spotlight on the stories that aren't being told elsewhere. That's why ABC News is Australia's most trusted voice.
Join Dan Borscher and Craig Allen, nightly at 7.
Wednesday, the NBA is in damage control.
Jim's acting really weird. So is Rhonda.
And there'll be no escape for Tony.
Jim, I'm due in Osaka in 48 hours.
When a big project causes big headaches.
Jesus, Tony. Problem? We're here.
There.
The new season of Utopia, Wednesday at 9 on ABC and iView.
This is ABC News. Hello, I'm Andrew Gagan. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, petrol prices set to soar after drone attacks strike at the heart of Saudi Arabia's oil refineries. Carmaker Volkswagen settles a $100 million class action in Australia over the diesel emissions testing scandal. And a magpie blamed for the death of an elderly cyclist. US President Donald Trump says his country is locked and loaded to respond to attacks in Saudi Arabia, which inflicted serious damage on the kingdom's oil infrastructure. Yemen's Houthi rebels have threatened more attacks unless the Saudis stop their military campaign in their country. But the United States insists Iran is to blame for the weekend strikes. As Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams reports, this further complicates a bloody civil war with wide-reaching global consequences.
It sounds like the title of a bad movie, but the attack of the deadly drones was used to devastating effect. Half of Saudi Arabia's refining capacity gone. The Americans are convinced it wasn't the Houthis in Yemen, but their alleged sponsors.
Secretary Pompeo has made clear that the Iranian regime is responsible for this attack on civilian areas and infrastructure vital to our global energy supply.
But the Houthi commanders claim it was all their own work and nothing to do with Iran.
We exploited vulnerabilities in the Saudi defence system, and we built our drones to avoid their defences. So their airspace became open to us after the systems failed to even spot our drones.
Houthi commanders challenged the Americans to prove the Iranians were responsible and warned the Saudis to expect more of the same if they don't stop bombing Yemen. Yemen's Houthi rebels began their rebellion against the country's President Mansour Hadi back in 2015. After 4 years of bloody conflict, the Shia rebels control much of the country's west. They are backed by Iran. The Hadi government side is backed by a coalition of 8 mostly Sunni Arab states led by Saudi Arabia. The Saudis receive military and intelligence support from the United States. The conflict has created one of the world's worst man-made humanitarian disasters, with thousands of civilians killed and millions on the brink of starvation. An already complex situation was made even more unstable when aircraft from the coalition ally United Arab Emirates supported separatists in the south of the country and attacked forces loyal to President Hadi, the very man the Saudis and the UAE say they were committed to defending. The Swedes are leading peace talks, but so far on the ground there's only more suffering for millions in this nation blighted by proxy politics. Philip Williams, ABC News.
And our Middle East correspondent Adam Harvey joins us now from Beirut with reaction from the region. So Adam, is there any evidence to support the Houthi rebels' claim of responsibility for the air attacks?
Well, Mike Pompeo says that there's not, Andrew. In fact, there's evidence, it seems, that the US has released in the last couple of hours, which seems to suggest that the missile strike on the oil processing facilities came from the north, drones and missiles, probably. So the US photographs, satellite imagery that have been released, show 17 points of impact at the Abqaiq plant in Saudi Arabia. Very precise strikes inside the plant. Now, Yemen is 800 kilometres away from this plant, so you're talking about some extremely accurate drones, if indeed they've come from Yemen. If they've come from Iraq or Iran, both of which are about half that distance, the likelihood of a more precise strike is, I think, increased. Now, those photographs show not just precise strikes on the plant itself, but pinpoint accuracy on particular parts of that plant. And I think that's the reason why you've got Saudi Arabia's almost entire oil production capacity stalled because of this. This is a gas processing plant. It's a plant that separates crude oil from the other components. Without this plant, Saudi Arabia really can't export anything. The other barrels that are being exported, the other over 3 million barrels, I think, that are being exported are from its reserves. So this is an extremely accurate strike, and more likely, as the US says, from the north.
And Adam, the UN has urged restraint. Has Saudi Arabia indicated how it's likely to respond to this attack?
No, Saudi Arabia hasn't actually blamed Iran for this attack yet. It's been quite circumspect. The White House, indeed, hasn't blamed Iran yet. It's only Mike Pompeo at the moment who says that Iran is responsible. If there is a response, I think you're already seeing that it's likely to come from the United States with Donald Trump's locked and loaded comment. Perhaps there'll be some kind of Saudi Arabian element as well. But Perhaps this doesn't have that much to do with Yemen. Perhaps it's more to do with the tension, the conflict between this Cold War between the United States and Iran. And Yemen is really the excuse. You've got these sanctions which are biting particularly hard in Iran at the moment, driving up prices, causing the Iranian currency to go through the floor. Iran is in a lot of pain, and you're seeing these incidents happening with regularity since May and June when we saw those tanker strikes. It's all about Iran and the US, and I think less about Yemen.
Adam, thanks very much. Our correspondent Adam Harvey in Beirut. Ramifications of the attacks will be felt in Australia, with petrol prices set to soar. Saudi Arabia is the world's biggest oil supplier, and the two plants which were attacked generated about half of the country's total oil output.
Motorists around the country are bracing for the inevitable.
Prices are going to go up. I think that's what's going to happen, unfortunately.
They're getting really high. I don't know what's going on, but I like it when they're lower.
US President Donald Trump issued a swift reassurance that there was plenty of oil. But for whom? Australia has 2 months of reserves. It should have 3, and there are no guarantees of US help as a backup if needed.
The IEA has informed us that we are well stocked, that the world is well stocked. This is a global disruption. It's about global prices. And so we expect any impact to be minimal.
Motoring groups aren't so sure. A big hit could be in the pipeline.
This will affect Australian motorists badly.
In early trading, Brent crude prices surged $12 a barrel, which would normally translate to an increase of 12 cents a litre at the petrol pump.
So we are waiting to see what sort of flow on that has here in Australia. You normally have to wait 7 or 10 days.
The attack took out production of nearly 6 million barrels a day, more than half Saudi Arabia's output.
And when you talk about the global production, that's almost more than 5% of the global oil production.
It's the biggest disruption Saudi Arabia has ever experienced.
No matter what happens in the short term, this event will have longer-term implications because it exposes the vulnerability of global oil supplies, and that means a geopolitical risk premium will be built into world oil prices.
Motorists are already contemplating a Plan B.
I'll probably try to stop driving so much everywhere, yeah.
It's the last thing a sluggish economy needs. Philip Lasker, ABC News.
Fiji's Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has warned the Australian government it needs to do more if it wants to be considered as family in the Pacific. Mr Bainimarama made the remarks at a meeting in Canberra today with Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Foreign Affairs reporter Melissa Clark has more from Canberra. Unfortunately, we don't have that story. Let's move on. 3 New South Wales Liberal MPs are calling for a spill against State Premier Gladys Berejiklian. Tanya Davies, Matthew Mason-Cox and Lou Amato are moving to challenge the Premier tomorrow morning. The move comes after weeks of heated debate over the state's abortion bill, with the challenging MPs its most vocal critics. The MPs have released a statement saying that the Premier's position is untenable and must be resolved urgently. Multinational carmaker Volkswagen Group has settled 2 major Australian class actions relating to the global diesel emissions scandal. About 100,000 car owners will share in compensation package totalling more than $100 million.
Richard Cantor is one of thousands of Australians sold diesel cars by Volkswagen, Audi and Skoda, fitted with software designed to cheat emissions tests. Now Mr Cantor is among those entitled to compensation.
I didn't think at any time that Volkswagen could walk away without having done anything, because clearly they were in the wrong. They had their hands in the cookie jar and they got caught.
Just last year, Volkswagen denied it had a case to answer here in Australia, despite having already agreed to compensate customers in North America.
It's a settlement that will see a minimum of 87 million for affected motorists, and that number going up to as much as 127.1 million, depending on the eventual size of the claimant group.
The settlement comes without any admission of liability by Volkswagen, but it means Australians with cars powered by the EA189 engine will each be entitled to about $1,400 in compensation.
We see this as a really significant victory for motorists who claim they were financially impacted by the diesel emissions issue.
Perhaps the final judgment will come from drivers themselves. In the United States, Volkswagen offered to buy back cars at their previous market value, as well as offering compensation of up to $10,000 US. One of the lead plaintiffs in the Australian case says she sees the result as a win.
This is a decision that has actually delivered for Australian consumers economic justice through this case. It has been a long time coming.
Volkswagen is still facing a separate civil case from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. Amy Bainbridge, ABC News.
Hong Kong has witnessed some of its worst violence since pro-democracy protests began in June. Overnight, wild street brawls broke out between opposing groups, with pro-Beijing residents increasingly confronting the anti-government protesters. China correspondent Bill Birtles is there, and a warning his story contains scenes of strong violence.